Hello, CANAC 2022 attendees. My name is Morgan Wadhams, and in this presentation, I will begin to unpack the experiences of transitions into and out of correctional centers in Alberta, Canada for people living with HIV. I would first like to acknowledge the generous contributions of SHIRC, Universities Without Walls, RNet, the University of Alberta, and the Faculty of Nursing at the U of A towards his doctoral work. As well, this work could never have been completed without the generous support of my supervisor, my supervisory committee, and community partners. So thank you all. This research seeks to understand the experiences of people living with HIV transitioning into and out of correctional facilities, in the hope that this knowledge may help correctional and community practitioners to rethink their practices and how they understand the stories of people living with HIV. A significant aim of the proposed study is to provide insight into the sense-making processes and experiences of people who have faced significant inequities. This will allow us to rethink the effects of policies impacting the lives of incarcerated and previously incarcerated people living with HIV. It is from my experiences of working as an RN in corrections that I understand the significance of my proposed work. These experiences ground my understanding about transitions into and out of correctional facilities. They shape my questions about the experiences of people. As a member of the University of Alberta, I respectfully acknowledge that I am situated on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of the Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Cree, Métis, Nakota, Sioux, and Dene. I also recognize myself as an individual learning how to be a respectful neighbor, listener, and ally to the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples on these lands in the process of reconciliation. The layout of today's presentation is to provide an introduction to transitions around correctional facilities for people living with HIV, speak a bit about what narrative inquiry is and the current research study. Then we will discuss a narrative thread that has emerged from the work with the participants. So I wanted to begin with study to think with. Getting out of jail to nothing is the worst fucking feeling a human being can have. Knowing you have family, but they won't even come see you. They don't call you, nothing. Try to get a hold of you to help you out, not a fucking thing. While the project explores transitions into and out of facilities, this quote from Kyle, a participant in the study, has stood out to me regarding leaving facilities. Feelings of frustration and isolation were felt when he shared this with me. I also have a hard time imagining the worst feeling that someone can possibly have. It makes me ask you think, how would you feel in this circumstance? How would you know what to do in this scenario? What would you do to find a place to stay? I posed this quote for us to begin thinking with throughout the rest of this presentation. So with this, let's carry on. I have two learning outcomes for today. To first introduce you to narrative inquiry, and then for you to relate our conversation about a narrative thread that emerged from this work to your own experiences of working alongside people living with HIV who have a history of incarceration. I would like to first cover some of the research around going into and out of correctional facilities for people living with HIV in Canada and North America. So, remand centers in Canada are facilities where individuals are charged but not yet sentenced. They are awaiting trials where they may be sentenced and then go to a provincial or federal facility depending upon their length of sentencing. In 2017-2018, about half of adults released from remand centers in Canada were held for 1 week or less, with 75% of adults held for 1 month or less. This means when people enter facilities, they are not there often for that long, oftentimes just for 1 week or less. Overall admissions to adult correctional services totaled almost 400,000 to provincial and territorial adult services and almost 15,000 to federal services in 2017-2018 in Canada. In this context, the number of admissions represent each time an individual moves from one correctional facility to another or to the community programming. That's a lot of transitions in and out of facilities. Ultimately, transitions between correctional facilities and communities are difficult for people living with HIV. Barriers to reintegration into the community or correctional facility are prevalent, which include HIV-related stigma and the stigma from being incarcerated. Challenges of accessing and retaining employment and housing, living with addictions and ongoing mental health disorders, and navigating precarious social relations across multiple settings. However, transitioning into correctional centers in Canada and the US may be considered an opportunity to diagnose, engage, and treat HIV alongside other social and physical deficits affecting HIV care outcomes. Upon transitioning into correctional facilities, both antiretroviral therapy adherence and viral suppression rates increase, which is positive, as the HIV care continuum's 90-90-90 targets are met and even surpassed within Canadian federal facilities. These increased rates of antiretroviral therapy adherence and viral suppression may be partially attributed to the very low loss follow-up, assured dosing schedules, and lower levels of other substance use. Of course, the inverse occurs when people leave facilities to return to their communities, where viral suppression rates and antiretroviral therapy adherence decreases within the context of people living with HIV's competing needs for food, shelter, security, social relations, all in the context of mental health and substance use disorders. Yet, given the context of all this background literature and work that's been done, very limited research focuses on people's transitions into and out of provincial correctional facilities in Canada, with limited work seeking to understand people living with HIV's experiences of going both into and out of facilities. So after a bit of that background information on transitions for people living with HIV in Canada around correctional facilities, I'd like to now go into a little bit about what is narrative inquiry. So broadly, narrative inquiry is a qualitative research methodology with a longitudinal design and ongoing engagement of participants that focuses on the experiences of people, including personal and social interactions, the continuities of experiences, so ideas around temporality and time, and how place intersects with these focuses. Philosophically, narrative inquiry is constructed upon a doing-inspired view of experience, with its two criteria, interaction and continuity enacted in situations, and its relational ontology. It also draws upon a narrative understanding of experience informed by multiple philosophers, theorists, and practitioners across diverse disciplines and fields of work. There are a few general phases of a narrative inquiry study that I can speak to now. So for a bit of context, this study's fieldwork has been going on since July 2021 within the greater Edmonton area. I have connected with 2 participants on a very regular basis. The data I have collected is in the form of diverse field texts, so recorded conversations, field notes, different physical artifacts, and writings. After engaging with participants in the field for the first few months, I began the process of co-composing narrative accounts. Narrative accounts are texts and also other forms such as poetry, other kind of communication mediums, photos, that are written for and negotiated with participants. I am currently in the process of composing these with the participants, and this presentation is based upon these beginning insights and conversations, so this work isn't completed yet, it's still ongoing. After composing narrative accounts, I turn towards identifying and thinking with narrative threads. Narrative threads look at ideas or ways of making sense of experiences that are similar across participants. Because the focus of narrative inquiry is on understanding how people make sense and meaning of individual experience, narrative threads aren't generalizations, but can rather be understood as a shared model of possibility who have had similar experiences. Within this presentation, I have one beginning thread that will be discussed a little bit later on. And the last phase of narrative inquiry study is formulating the research text. Final research texts take the place of traditional academic publications and presentations. So this can be like your doctoral thesis, articles, presentations. This is currently ongoing as of now. So, I would love to give a short introduction to the participants I'm working with right now. So, Kyle is the first participant. He's a gay man around 46 years old and has been living with HIV since he was 18 years old. He has spent a significant amount of his life within correctional facilities and he lives within the Edmonton area. Across his very interesting and dynamic life, he has engaged in using and selling different types of thrills. So thrills in this sense can be understood as drugs or sex work over his many years, and he is just a joy to be connected and working with. The other participant is Bruce. So Bruce is a heterosexual man around 65 years old and has been living with HIV for almost 20 years. He has been in and out of facilities across his lifespan and is currently in the process of searching for a more permanent home. He has lived all over Alberta and he's made a living with his professional background training as a B-grade pressure welder. So Kyle and Bruce both have diverse identities and lives, but they do share an ongoing street life. Both of their experiences and field texts contribute to our conversation today, and I've met with them both repeatedly numerous times and ongoing since July 2021. So, while there will be multiple threads and ideas that come out of this work, one that has begun to stand out from the field text, a piece that raises many questions and ways to begin thinking about transitions for people living with HIV around correctional facilities, is thinking about their experiences from a place of differences. Integrated in our personal and professional practices are differences between our identities, lives, and experiences. There are differences between us and how we make sense and meaning of our experiences and the decision making behind our actions. Narrative thread, again, are not generalizations, but they can be understood as a shared model of possibility for people who have had similar experiences. If you have been involved with supporting or working alongside people living with HIV going into and out of facilities, or even not in these contexts, I ask you to please think with this idea a bit. Take a moment to reflect on the diverse people you work with and alongside. What is different between you and them? What makes you each distinct? What similarities do you share, and how do you work through differences? Why do you each do the things that you do? And how do we come to understand and connect with experiences that are so different from our own? Just take a second for that. So, I'd like to think with this thread a little bit more in the context of finding a home or housing for Bruce and Kyle. While there were many pieces of their lives that Bruce and Kyle spoke about that were different from one another and myself, such as using diverse substances, living a square life or a street life, or approaches to maintaining and protecting their freedom, one very important piece that stood out in our conversations was finding and keeping a home. Since last speaking with Bruce, he is still searching for a home and housing. After falling out with a friend at a farm he was staying at, and then staying with another friend in the city, he has been without a stable home for a few months and is couch surfing and sleeping outside. He shared, "I got chased out of a park, on an LRT, and fell asleep on a boardwalk just recently." This quote has just a few of his experiences, as he has faced uncertainty trying to find housing while living in public places, causing him significant discomfort during the later winter months and early spring. And I now go on to Kyle. I have been conversing with Kyle since July 2021, and since we last spoke, he has kept secure housing throughout this entire time. Albeit finances can be a struggle at times, he shared with me, "Go sleep under a tree." So he referenced panhandling, being without a home. "I fucking fuse. I would never be caught dead sleeping outside when I can go do something and have a hotel room in an hour, right? I don't get it." This quote to me represents a difference between Kyle, Bruce, and I. Kyle has a different way of approaching housing than Bruce. It is not necessarily good nor bad, but it is different. Ultimately, both Kyle and Bruce have different approaches to life when it comes to finding and keeping at home. These are different approaches, and how they make meaning of these decisions are also part of the experience of going into and out of correctional facilities. Thinking with the idea of differences, it does make me wonder, how would you or I, in the context of trying to find and keep a home, do? What kind of rationale would go into doing what you do in that circumstance? Questions can be posed around how people structure boundaries and perceive morality within their lives. These ideas relate to acceptable or unacceptable actions and how we end up coping with our decisions. Bruce will sleep outside if he cannot find a home through support services or other avenues. Kyle will do something that will at least provide him with a warm hotel room within the hour. While I really don't have a direct answer to those lines of questions I just asked you, I believe that opening up and discussing the choices and actions that people make or do not make when they go into and out of facilities, living with HIV or not living with HIV, is important to understanding how to best support the people we work for and with. So, what does this mean for practice? The question that we all have. What does this presentation mean for my practice for people living with HIV and other STBBIs? So, I've worked within corrections as an RN for almost 8 years. I recognize the importance of trying to make our jobs easier, our roles easier, create relationships, and implement best practices. While I cannot really give any generalizations, this narrative thread around differences can begin to act as a starting place to begin thinking about how we create and maintain relationships with people living with HIV who have a history of incarceration, both inside and outside of the walls of facilities. It can also be used as a point to begin thinking about how we connect with others that are ultimately different than us, and that's not bad. From my conversations with Bruce and Kyle, along with the relationships I have created with them and many others within the walls of correctional facilities, service organizations and practitioners should forefront the differences between themselves and others while thinking about how people navigate their choices in life and why they make the decisions they do. I believe it is important that when negotiating and maintaining professional relationships, that you need to focus on mutual respect, integrate humor, and really be aware of the experiences that you bring to these relationships. And please, 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 always stay true to your word. If you say you will do something, do it, or at least tell them why you can't, or follow up with them about why you cannot. Also, to keep your doors open, metaphorically and literally, open for people to come back to. Being a support does not necessarily entail having someone access your services regularly, but can also just mean having a good reputation that they can then turn towards if needed. Unfortunately, this is a preliminary discussion, but more work will follow this thread around differences as the doctoral work continues. So, as a short wrap-up, narrative inquiry is a qualitative research methodology that seeks to understand how people make sense and meaning of their experiences. I have been conducting a narrative inquiry study with Kyle and Bruce since July 2021. It is ongoing and will continue to evolve through the data analysis phase as I co-compose narrative accounts, identify and discuss narrative threads, and finally complete the research text. Overall, a significant aim of this study is to provide insight into the sense-making processes and experiences of people who have experienced significant inequities. It is the hope that these insights can help us further understand the experiences of transitions around correctional facilities for people living with HIV and inform the practices of those who work with these individuals within and outside the walls of correctional facilities. I wanted to end this presentation by coming back to this initial idea that we thought about. After reading this, close your eyes and imagine. When you feel isolated and frustrated, you just left a correctional facility and you have nothing, what would you do to alleviate the worst fucking feeling a human being can have? What would you do or not do to have something instead of nothing? How would you justify what would be right or wrong in this situation? Would that rationale have changed over time? And how may you decide which might end up being different from the others that you work with and for? How would different people approach this question in different ways and then make different decisions? So that's the rest. That's all the presentation right now. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me a message on Whova with any questions you may have. And as well, thank you to the CANAC 2022 conference organizers. You have all been absolutely incredible.